One is I definitely believe in the idea of people say, you should fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I think if you're working on problems you really care about, then failure becomes more a question of, okay, that tactic isn't working, but the problem still matters. So what other tactic should I go after? I often think about problems where if there's some aspect of the world that bugs me or I feel like it should be better, I sort of think, well, either someone else is going to come along and fix this and then it won't be a problem anymore. Or if not, I've still got an opportunity, and so I sort of can't lose in that regard. And I think in that coupled with the fact that a lot of times what you're building may not work exactly the way you expected, but you may end up developing technology or ideas or relationships as a part of it that actually do help you be successful in a different way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders in Tech. This podcast is dedicated to honor the people that are pushing the envelope in the companies they are working on to make this world a better place with technology. But when I say technology, I don't mean just technology, with the people that create, implement, and maintain the technology. And today we have a beautiful example of those amazing leaders with us. Joseph, welcome to the show, brother.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Joseph, for the audience, can you please tell me your full name, where do you live, and what do you do for a living? Where do you work for?
Sure, yeah. I'm Joseph Smarr, and I live in Half Moon Bay, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, but out by the ocean. So a little bit out of the way from the hustle and bustle, but kind of a nice way to be connected and removed at the same time. And I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer at a startup called Triller, which is building AI-powered technology for the creator economy, for creators and brands to be able to engage and monetize more effectively all of their fans now that we're all drowning in followers and comments and so forth. And it's an exciting area that AI can really help with.
That's exciting, and I would love to get to learn more about the technology itself, but let's begin with the ocean. No wonder you look so good and young. When I talked to you first time, I thought you were like 29. Of course, you look by the ocean.
It is really nice, and the nature and the sunlight and the water and all of that. I grew up in the Midwest in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, where the university is, and so I always sort of dreamed of, when you think of California, you think of the ocean. And it's funny to me that I came out here to go to school in the .com era, but most people sort of stop short the way the San Francisco Bay Peninsula is. You never quite make it to the ocean. There's one more set of hills, and I always sort of thought, guys, it's right over there. So I really enjoy living out there.
That's beautiful. That was one of my life dreams, just to move close to the ocean or have
exactly. And ironically, it's actually, housing in the Bay Area is notoriously expensive, but it's actually less expensive by the ocean than not by the ocean because people think of it as sort of too far away. So it's kind of a funny little arbitrage opportunity in the local market.
Isn't that beautiful? And you don't want to be downtown anyways. Like San Francisco is not so nice anymore in the downtown area, right?
Well, and it's easy to, the nice thing about Half Moon Bay is it's right between the South Bay, where sort of Google and all of that is, and up in San Francisco. So for example, I'm going to a AI event up in San Francisco this evening, but it's just a straight shot up the coast. So it's actually a lot quicker to get there from here than if I was living down in, Palo Alto or Mountain View.
That's beautiful. I really wanted to live by the ocean. And so one day I told my wife, let's find a place parallel to the Eastern Seaboard, because that's where my companies are, so that we can actually work from there if we want to. So we ended up in Panama. And it's funny because, we had this beautiful property in mind. We got it and we never used it. It got rented, and then, to make the long story short, I never been able to live by the ocean yet.
Yeah, well, everything like engineering, everything is full of trade-offs, right? So a bit more driving. That's why I'm very bullish on self-driving cars and, electric vertical takeoff and landing planes and all of that. That'll make it easier for people to live where they want to live and not have the commute be as much of an issue. But obviously the rise of remote work has made it a lot easier too. This was a very nice place to be stuck during the pandemic compared to a lot of opportunities, for example.
Yeah, and I think COVID made that possible, right? This is one of the silver linings about this horrible condition that we had. I didn't have the problem because I engineered my main business is a software consulting firm, and we engineered it to be remote since 2005.
So before it was cool.
remote first before it was called. It was hard for my clients. They wanted to see my developers, right? I'm like, no, let them work from home. So, but because of the quality of the work, I proved to them that it could be done.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were using like people don't know this, but this whole Zoom thing. Like I was using screen sharing in a remote session way back in the day, like in the early 2000s. You could actually do this.
Yep.
The problem was the internet, so you couldn't have a voice video conversation, but you could certainly share the screen with somebody and chat, right?
Right. No, it's funny. I've seen this play over a period of decades actually, because when I mentioned I grew up in Illinois, and my dad there started this supercomputer center, NCSA, where that was some of the first times that academics had access to supercomputers. And so you had this whole kind of remote work problem in a different sense, which is that most academics couldn't physically go where the supercomputers were. And so they needed to be able to work on technology. So they invented NCSA Telnet, which was sort of the forerunner of, people SSH into things today, that sort of thing. And they had this remote collaboration system back in the 80s called Collage, where you could screen share. And then most famously, they built NCSA Mosaic, which was sort of the first of the modern web browsers. And again, it was designed for easier remote collaboration between academics for different kinds of papers and things like that. And there were so many different protocols for sharing information that you really needed a simple graphical user interface to put all together. And then they were also pioneering a lot of the video teleconferencing and telepresence, and could you put large tiled screens together to make it seem like more immersive presence. And so it's funny to see, obviously now we sort of take it for granted that we have video calling on our phones and our smart displays in our houses and all that kind of thing, but it really has been quite a long progression. And maybe now with VR and some of these new systems, we'll actually get to another level of immersive presence, because we still haven't it's obviously still a lot better to be in person with people when you can.
For sure. So this is your dad. So you were involved with technology since you were a kid then?
Yeah, it was literally just, the stuff your parents bring home from work type of thing. My dad was bringing home Silicon Graphics computers and all of this sort of stuff that in retrospect was, really whiz bang. But at the time, it was just kind of cool things to play with. And it's certainly nice to be immersed in other, smart nerds who were doing really cool work and seeing how exciting it could be to play with the cutting edge of technology and build things. And so, yeah, that was definitely my hobby as a kid, was, playing with whatever you could do with the latest Macs or, workstations or whatever.
I'm a man of faith, and I really believe that there is no coincidences in life. And I tell you this because, like you were born into a family that, your parents were into technology. Like myself, back in the 1982, I was 10 years old. And my uncle was a senior software engineer, and that became a CIO later for a large bank. But back then was with punch cards. Mm-hmm. So the technology he will bring home will be all these used punch cards that I didn't know where they were, but we were building castles with my sister with it. Until one day he showed me what it was, and it was code that ran into a compile machine, right? So I'm like, and he was the one that taught me how to use a text editor back in 1985, and that's what made me fall in love with computer science. So his influence, also my dad. Listen to this is incredible. My dad bought an Apple IIe. The Apple IIe is the one that was on the space shuttle.
Yeah.
He bought it in 1984 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he locked it, and he made sure that I saw where he left the key. Mm-hmm. So I was sneaking in, trying to get into the computer, and I learned how to use that computer inside and out. And it was still text-based. There was no mouse or anything.
Yeah. No, so some of my friends, right? Their parents had computers, but they sort of didn't want the kids touching them. And our household was very much the opposite. So I'm grateful for that, because I'm sure that we were in over a head, especially, when you become a Unix sysadmin as a young teenager, you can do a lot of damage, right? But the fact that I think in particular, I was probably 11 or 12 when they started working on NCSA Mosaic. And so it was right at that age where I could play with it, and you view source, and you could start making web pages and publishing them to the world. So that idea of that kind of loop of how hard is it to learn the technology, and then how kind of rewarding is it, then how quickly can you iterate, and the fact that you could learn from what other people were doing, I think that was a perfect place to catch the bug of technology and realizing how empowering it could be.
That was beautiful. Later on in life, like later on in life, when I was about 35 years old, my dad told me, "You think I didn't know you were touching the computer? I made it impossible. I made it prohibited for you to inspire you to use it." because I know you were a rebel
That's
teenager.
very clever, sort of three-dimensional chess. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Reverse psychology.
Now, I feel like I thought I was getting away with a lot more stuff as a kid, and now that I have kids of my own, I realize like, the parents are pretty well attuned to what's going on.
But regarding Mosaic, I think it's beautiful. Like we have the blessing, Joseph, to be born in a stage in the world where we could see the evolution of computer science in a way that most people in the history of the world could never see.
I
Right?
completely agree with you. And it's funny because I've now been in Silicon Valley for 25 years, and I'm one of those people who's constantly trying to meet with other people and just share what I know and, make serendipity happen and all of that. And I feel like recently, as I've been meeting with more founders and so forth, I sound like the old guy a little bit, who's kind of like, well, let me tell you back in the day the way things were, and before we, and but it really is true that the pace of change. I mean, it's funny to think back when I came out to Stanford in '98, so right at the height of the .com explosion, right? And Mark Andreessen had been a student at NCSA and came out to start Netscape, and so there was all this sort of push out to the Silicon Valley. And at the time, it seemed like a really big deal. But if you think back to just how many people even had an internet connection back then, and it was all desktop, right? It wasn't mobile at all, and the bandwidth speeds were quite low, and the power of the computers was quite low. Like the actual addressable impact in people's lives you could have with technology was so much more limited back then than it is, compared to today, right? And even fast forwarding to when I left my original startup Plaxo and joined Google in 2010, again, it seemed like a late time in the company's history, right? And if you go back now, the world was so different. Google was so different. It was a so much more innocent time in terms of just the impact that tech has on society and the sort of hand-wringing people have about the pluses and minuses of tech. So even in my limited career, it has been a dramatic change, and it's been really interesting to see.
Talking about Google, when was it that they purchased YouTube?
2006, I believe.
So you were like 4 years after that, right?
Yeah. So, and Larry and Sergey were starting Google at Stanford when I was there, and so I actually interacted with them a few times. And I was in this program at Stanford called Symbolic Systems, which was sort of AI, cognitive science, natural language, and that was people were very interested in Google there, and they were recruiting heavily from that program. So I, foolishly turned them down, and when there were a few hundred people, because I thought, oh, that's a big company. I'm more of a startup guy, and a lot of my friends were very early employees there. And so I feel like I'd watched the company for a long time and seen it, go from being, this scrappy thing that nobody really took seriously to obviously a big success. But in retrospect, that even 2010 was early days for the company compared to where it is now.
I know enough computer science to know what's good and what's evil. And I'm saying this with much respect for other social media platforms. But last year, I decided to turn everything off except YouTube and Google. And it's because I can still manage to program, if you will, the algorithm to show me what I want to see.
Yeah.
To get rid of all the noise and all the bad stuff in the world. So I actually feel blessed for that. I mean, YouTube is a venue, like, for example, this recording is going to go on YouTube. And if you really learn how to use your SEO and you really know how to play with Google AdWords and all that, you can really bless a lot of people with that platform.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because the startup I did right out of Stanford with some other colleagues was called Plaxo, and it was an early sort of smart address book, even sort of proto-social networking type of startup. And because we were connecting with all of these other Web 2.0 social networks that were starting at the time, like the YouTube founders came into my office before the acquisition and were showing off this kind of cool idea about how to put videos on the internet, and they used our address book widget to try to help you could share videos with your friends. And because YouTube took off, that little widget that we had embedded on their site ended up dwarfing all of our server traffic, and we because they went so viral. And our friends helped start Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all of these companies. And so we were sort of around right for the birth of that initial wave of social media and trying to convince people why it was a good idea to put yourself out there and get connected, and why you should have a blog, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, fast forward, and obviously it's causing a lot more mixed impact on society, to say the least. And one of the things I have a lot of empathy for is watching a lot of my friends I helped start Google Plus, which was Google's, ultimately, ill-fated effort in social networking. But a lot of those people ended up moving over to YouTube. And they're, have as good intention and as good a talent as anybody you're going to find anywhere. And even they really struggle with this problem of how do you stop people from going down rabbit holes via recommendation and getting to more extreme content, or dealing with toxicity in comments, or figuring out how to, balance maximizing people's watch time without making it addictive. And, all these problems that we wrestle with, they're clearly hard problems where it's not just nefarious actors who, who have different incentives in mind or whatever, like actually trying to give people the good that is clearly there without the bad coming along for it is clearly a very challenging problem.
For sure. But, on the other side, I haven't watched a single commercial since 2011, because everything is being IPTV for me, so I could actually choose and watch, right? It's amazing.
That's right.
When I go to a hotel room and I turn on the TV and they have cables, like, who's using cable still,
And it's funny, like we just watched the Super Bowl and my kids are fascinated by the commercials because they never see commercials. Like almost everything they watch is on demand. And so for them, I'm sometimes, if we DVR something or whatever, I'm trying to fast forward through the commercials. They're like, no, I want to see that. That's really interesting. So yeah, I grew up, of course, inundated with ads in linear TV and was happy to be able to get rid of them. But it is a totally different experience now.
Joseph, tell me, I want you to explain your brain and your line of thinking, because in this podcast I have interviewed CIOs, CTOs, like technology leaders for multinational corporations, for hospitals that run billions and billions of dollars, very mature people that all they want to do is stay within big corporations and make an impact in that way. And then I talk to you, and you have this beautiful capacity to lead. And what I see in your path is startup from startup to startup. What's in your mind? Why the startup bug?
No, I think it's partly that, when you come out to Silicon Valley, you sort of fall in love with the idea that a small group of talented and ambitious people can really change the world in a profound way. And that, the incentives are best aligned in a startup because the value you're creating is also the value that you're able to capture. And it's funny because I've worked in small companies that became bigger companies. I've worked in giant companies like Google, and and now I'm back in startup land again. And in many ways, I feel like the entrepreneurial, tool set that you have can work in both places. I sometimes joke with my friends that I'm cursed to be a serial entrepreneur as much as a serial entrepreneur, because even at a place like Triller where I am now, I'm trying to help pull some of the acquisitions we've done together and make something that's more than the sum of its parts. And so, you're never sort of in pure startup mode in that sense. But I do think that the things that are challenging in big companies are, people talk about it, but your connection to the customer is not as clear. Your sort of hunger level and need to actually be very careful with the choices that you're making, the speed that you can go, the amount of sort of politics and cooks in the kitchen, risk aversion, et cetera. I think it just does become harder to push yourself. And I'm the kind of person who, I really do see massive potential for technology to empower people and make the world better. And I'm impatient. I want to work hard and see the fruits of the labor and go as quickly as I can. And you do get constrained, even though you have more resources and more people in bigger companies, it just becomes harder to actually do that kind of core inner loop of innovation and iteration and getting things out there. And so I guess that's why for me it's always still exciting, and especially because the amount of resources you have available to yourself as a startup now have continued to get better. So I was kind of amazed. I thought I would go to Google for a couple of years. I ended up there for 12 years, and when I came back out, things that didn't exist before included like cloud computing and, all this mobile, React and Node and all these new ways that people build stuff, and all of this sort of SaaS and open source and frameworks and so forth, right? And so I think the opportunity for small companies to have big impact, while there are real challenges in terms of the way that the big companies have controlled, distribution, and there are all of these vertically integrated ecosystems, and there's not a lot of real interoperability or data portability. So I think there are some real headwinds, but I still think innovation is still best done in the startup space. And so it's exciting to be able to keep doing that and keep staying fresh.
It's funny, Joseph, because in some sense, I'm like you. That's why I asked the question. My career, like the first 10 years of my career were in big multinationals, and I grew up the corporate ladder to become a leader in technology in those places until I thought, I was changing jobs every two years. And then I realized that what I wanted is the art of creation, the challenge of accomplishing something new that added massive value. And that's the spirit of a startup entrepreneur. So that's why I started ISU, my software consulting firm. And so because what I saw is that every 2 years, what I will do is I will get hired to manage something that didn't exist or create something that didn't exist. I will create it with my team, implement it, and when it was time to do maintenance, I will get so bored that I will jump to another job. So now what we do for a living is create technology for other companies constantly. Every new project is different and new, and we have to push the envelope. And as a result, now I have 7 different companies, and 6 of them are in technology. But it's just because I learned the art of co-creation, and all of them, and of course, small companies compared to the huge companies that are in the world. But that's what is exciting to me. Also, like you said, being able to have challenges in a way that a big corporation may not have, because you have limited budgets, you have scarce resources with your staffing. I mean, like, everything is against you, and that's what I love, right? It's like, okay, let's see if we can solve this.
It really sharpens the mind, yeah. And I think, you know, there are moments where you can create those conditions inside of a bigger company. I certainly found myself attracted to those more entrepreneurial opportunities, like creating Google Plus from scratch. I was part of the founding team of Google Photos. I joined the Google Assistant team very early on and built a lot of the core sort of dialogue technology platform there. So those were all kind of, you could think of them as startups in a big company, but you really do have to put an asterisk on it, because you are surrounded by a lot of people who are not thinking like entrepreneurs, right? And where the incentives are quite different. And you're obviously, your own personal upside isn't really tied to the value you're creating there. And so, you know, I think there's a limit to how much that model can really apply.
That was the one thing, exactly what you said. That's why, by the way, I admire companies like Google or Apple that come up with these amazing innovations within a big corporate context, because it's so hard. One of the last jobs that I had, I was already a leader in technology there, and then I realized that me and my entire team could die in 1 second, and nothing will matter. Like, it will be like just like a blip, because the company was so big that it was like a grain of sand in the vastness of the ocean, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I want to know that my stuff matters, you know?
I totally understand that. That was part of my ultimate motivation for jumping back into startup land, is I sort of realized that, you know, I wasn't irreplaceable. And in fact, I tried to think, like, who's the most amazing person in our, you know, multi-thousand person Google Assistant team that Google would say, like, stop the world to keep this person from leaving. And I was like, there's nobody, as far as I can tell. You know, it's just the nature of a company that size, is they have to be able to build based on working with whoever they've got, as opposed to sort of nobody's irreplaceable. Whereas in startups, like, almost everybody's irreplaceable. You know what I mean? It really is interesting how different that is. And so, you know, and I'm just a believer that you have to steer into your strengths. And so, like you, I love the idea of going from a problem statement to thinking cleverly. How can technology and data and better user experience, how can that actually unlock some real, you know, new capability, something that empowers people or something that delights people, and actually bringing that into fruition. You know, I sort of realized I started out doing academic research, but I really liked that real world impact that you could have, and you want to approach it kind of with an R&D mindset, right? Of like, try to build new things that weren't possible before. But ultimately, you know, at least for me, the satisfaction comes from actually seeing the impact that it has on everyday people's lives. And so I think you have to, I really admire the type of people who can take an existing business and iteratively improve it 10% a year over a period of a long time. That's obviously super important, and we need lots of people to be able to do that. But like you, I sort of get itchy after a while and decide, I wonder if there's something else I could jump into where nobody has a clue what to do, and let's try to just figure it out, you know?
And you know, another pitfall as a leader now in my businesses is that I see is that because we're in a startup mode all the time, we have also this tendency to have irreplaceable people, but that's super bad for the environment, for the business, especially if you want to exit. So in the last 5 years, we have put procedures in place where we move up guys that are replaceable to the next level, so that we teach them how to delegate and teach the other kids that are coming after them, so that eventually they can graduate to other companies, or they can do whatever they want. Because I've had horrible experiences where actually I've been called, for example, you know Cinnabon, the company Cinnabon?
Sure.
Okay, so they are a franchise, right, organization. So the region of where I live in Canada, in Ontario, one of the key guys actually died.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in panic because they couldn't process invoicing on payments for all the stores. This is back in 2009, and they didn't know what to do, and like it was like nobody could help, and we had to do reverse engineering and come back. Like it was a hard job. We figured it out, but I'm like, okay, this is the risk of having somebody that is irreplaceable.
Sure. And
Right?
even short of something tragic like that, you want people to be able to take vacations or have kids and go on paternity and maternity leave, right? And so, yeah, I definitely agree that it's not necessarily a badge of honor to have people who are irreplaceable. I just mean, though, if you think about a lot of what makes the best technology startups work, it's really individual people and their particular ideas and their particular passion and their particular relationships and experience, where you couldn't just put an arbitrary team together and get the same result, right? And so, and you know, traditional business school analysis kind of, you know, assumes away the, you know, specialness of any one person and kind of thinks a lot about what's the business model, what's the processes, what's the incentives, what's the org chart, that kind of thing, right? But I think Silicon Valley is actually, the history of Silicon Valley is all about betting on individual outlier people to do things that weren't otherwise going to happen. And so, you know, at least to me, I sort of embrace that aspect of it.
Joseph, when was that time in your career when somebody gave you enough trust to lead a team, and how did that happen?
Yeah, it's happened a few times, actually. And it's a really good point that those moments really do matter. And they probably meant more to me than the person who was giving me that opportunity at the time. And now that I'm in a position where I'm managing more people, I try to think about, especially when you're dealing with really young, talented people who are still inexperienced but have a lot of potential, how to give them that same kind of, not only trust to have space to build, but also that belief in them that makes them say, like, oh, this person who's clearly successful thinks I can do it, then maybe I really can, right? Because I feel like that's the light that they shone down on me. So, I mean, I guess a couple of examples that come to mind is I was promoted to CTO at our startup Plaxo at a fairly young age, and I'd been leading an effort to, I mentioned at the time, all these social networks were coming up. I was really trying to help usher in an open social web where they would all be interoperable, and you wouldn't have to just have your Facebook friends couldn't talk to your Twitter friends, couldn't talk to, you know, trying to make it more interoperable, like what you would do where you could send an email from Gmail to Yahoo, or, you know, call someone on Verizon from T-Mobile, whatever. It seemed like, of course. And so I was doing a lot of work helping build open standards like OpenID and OAuth, and I was working with, you know, Google on Open Social and all of that. But to be able to actually steer, in many ways, what the company was known for and pull a lot of resources towards this vision that was still very unproven and was a, you know, it was a grow the pie kind of idea, right? It wasn't necessarily something that was bringing us revenue in the short term, but it felt like if we could play in that much larger space, it was going to be a lot more important. Whereas if the walled gardens win, then, you know, that's not going to be possible. So I think in retrospect, at the time, it just felt like, well, of course, we should all go do this. But in retrospect, I think the fact that the CEO and founders gave me that much rope was really valuable. And then when I got to Google, the engineering director who recruited me over, this was named David Glazer. He was the person I was working with at Plaxo while he was at Google. It sort of caught my eye and pulled me over. He is also one of these people who, amazing career and really at a personal level believed in me, and then introduced me to Vic Indotra, who was the SVP that started Google Plus and who put me in the position of, okay, you figure out what our social graph strategy is. And I helped, you know, create the circles model and all that kind of stuff. And he would pull me into all these meetings with Larry and Sergey and Eric and whatever. And again, I'd just been, you know, at the company for a few weeks at that point. And so I think the fact that those guys believed in me, again, at a personal level, as well as setting me up for that, I really thought that was amazing. And I was too naive at the time to appreciate how much most people at a big company like that were being much more conservative about what they would say to people like the founders or the execs, or what they would propose. I would get in these sort of like late night debates with Sergey over aspects of how we should build Google Plus and whatever. And it was only later I sort of realized from people, they were like, oh, that was really brave of you to do that. But I would just, to my mind, it was like, well, you brought me here to try to help, you know, lend my mind and make it successful. So like, what are we here for, right? It was very much that startup mentality. But in retrospect, those made a big difference. And, you know, and then that continues today, being pulled into a company like Triller as the CTO. It really is something where people are really looking to me to help set the strategy for the company. And there aren't like adults in the room I can go to. You know what I mean? I am the adult in the room
You
now, for
are the
better or worse.
adult.
It's like, uh-oh, they bought it. Now what? But I mean, I'm really grateful for that, because it really does give me a place where I feel like I can spread my wings and do my best work, and where it really does matter. So I think that's great.
Joseph, one of the key factors for a startup is the realization that you need to fail fast and fail forward in order to find the right solution for whatever it is that you're doing.
Yep.
And that's the first thing that you will see different from a big corporation. They try to avoid failure at all cost. That's why they move so slow. And it's understandable, because maybe when they were a startup, they were failing forward until they found the solution. But that's how many industries are being disrupted right now, because they don't want to innovate. Having said that, though, going through horrible failure is not easy. How do you
Right.
cope with that, and how do you motivate your team to get past? For example, you mentioned the Google social network, and I remember using Google Plus, and all of a sudden it just disappeared because it was a failure. How
Right.
do you deal with that and with your team?
Yeah, I guess a couple things I could say about that. One is, I definitely believe in the idea of, people say, you should fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I think if you're working on problems you really care about, then failure becomes more a question of, okay, that tactic isn't working, but the problem still matters. So what other tactic should I go after? I often think about problems where if there's some aspect of the world that bugs me, or I feel like it should be better, I sort of think, well, either someone else is going to come along and fix this and then it won't be a problem anymore, or if not, I've still got an opportunity, and so I sort of can't lose in that regard. And I think in that, coupled with the fact that a lot of times what you're building may not work exactly the way you expected, but you may end up developing technology or ideas or relationships as a part of it that actually do help you be successful in a different way. So, in the case of Google Plus, we ultimately, I think it was just sort of too late, frankly, for them to catch up with the network effects of the other big social networks, even though a lot of what we built was, people thought of it as sort of technically superior, or, superior as a product, but you couldn't get enough of your friends over. But we also, as a byproduct of that, we unified all of Google's data and account logins and all of that kind of stuff in a way that made possible things like the Google Assistant later on, right? And a lot of the infrastructure that we built for Google Plus is still powering a lot of the systems inside of Google today, in terms of how they scaled up, how they did transactions and sharing and access control and all that sort of stuff. And the product I was working on for Google Plus when it died was how to get people to share more of the photos that they take, because we would back up people's photos, they would take all these photos, they would never share them. And so I built the algorithms for this feature we called Stories, where it could kind of look at your time space history and the photos and realize, oh, this was your weekend in Argentina, and let's curate the best photos and make it easier to share. That feature was being used primarily, people loved it, but they mostly shared the results off of Google Plus instead of on Google Plus. And at the time, some people found that to be annoying, but that was part of what convinced the execs internally to make Google Photos its own standalone product, because they said people love all of the cool AI smarts you can do on top of your photos. They just don't want it to be tied to the social network that they're not using. And so it's sort of out of the ashes, in a way, became this product that is, continued to be pretty successful and pretty beloved. So I think there are always these ways to kind of keep pushing forward. And also just, as an entrepreneur, I think you always want to be mindful of the opportunity cost of what you're working on, because there's way too many interesting problems to work on and too many cool people to work with than one lifetime can manage. And so, when things aren't going well, obviously sometimes perseverance and keeping your head down and pushing through is the right thing to do. But there are other times to recognize that pushing this rock up a hill may not be as good a use of your time as doing something else. And so sometimes, in a way, the failure can help you recognize that thing that you should already recognize, which is that it's, time to make a different choice. And your life as a entrepreneur is long enough that you can get a lot of different at bats. And so you don't want to get trapped in something and too much sunken cost and all of that as well. So I know that's a smattering of thoughts there, but I think those are all ways to help pull people through.
Beautiful, because you're right. Like, if you look at a failure as a learning opportunity, and if you can grab the little success pieces that worked and apply them to something else, you're not really losing anything. I mean, yes, you lost the main objective, but you push technology forward in a way that it wouldn't happen if that project wouldn't have existed. The problem that I have with people these days is, for example, we get, we get invited to participate in a project for a company, and we go in and we do an engineering review, architecture review, and I have to tell me, a lot of the times, 80% of your code has to be refactored, and that's X number of dollars. And some of the people, the business people, say this is impossible. Like, we paid for all this, and I'm like, and it's like, can you actually just fix it? And I'm like, a lot of the times we have to walk away because they are not willing to take in that learning and the cost associated with the learning. And
Right.
I've seen a lot of companies go bankrupt because they don't want to refactor, right?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge believer in constant refactoring and code health and technical debt and all that sort of stuff. I think it's just, but the nature of the beast is you're chasing a problem where you're learning the requirements over time and the requirements are adapting over time. So it's sort of impossible to build the perfect system. And even if you could, it's not going to stay fixed. Like, the requirements will be different in the future than they were in the past. And you also learn a lot in the process of building. And so you need to constantly be able to take that knowledge and feed it back. And if you're paying attention, as I try to stay very connected to not only writing code, but reviewing all the code that my team is writing, because you can see where the friction is, where you're having to duplicate things, or where things don't fit together cleanly, or where you're not getting the separation of concerns that you expected. And if you're not kind of constantly attuned to that signal and putting in that effort and thinking of it as something that's going to have positive ROI, I mean, I think you could go overboard on that, but most companies don't. And even at Google, which has some of the best engineers and some of the best refactoring technology around, most projects kind of collapse under their own weight of technical debt. I mean, that is the failure mode for most of these things, more so than that, the users go away. And so if you're not, I think, constantly thinking about what have you learned about the shape of the problem, and how are you adapting your solution to fit that shape of the problem in a way that's natural, you'll see it will become harder to build new features. Your code will get buggier. Your people will get, burned out, right? Like, all of those sort of effects of not taking that seriously are very real. And if you think of that as sort of part of your primary job, then it really is just, you're constantly making those course corrections. Then I think you can see it as a very positive thing. But yeah, of course, not all stakeholders are so enlightened.
One of the things that you mentioned is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I want to take it to another level, because another thing that I realized that I was at fault is that I will fall in love with computer languages. And I will say, this is the best, right. And the guys are I'm trying to make a stupid war in my head about different solutions.
Yep.
Until I became mature enough and a good enough leader to say, there is a different tool for a different problem, and we're not supposed to fall in love with languages. And if you're a good coder, if you're a good developer, you're supposed to learn languages like this, because the foundation is the same anyway, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, this is true. And I've programmed in so many different languages over my career. And on the one hand, there's clearly value to being able to stay with one and go deep enough to really kind of hone your craft and to understand, get connected to the community, that kind of thing. On the other hand, they are constantly changing, and what you need them to do is constantly changing. And I think there is real improvement happening as well. I think, I watched it, the time I was at Google was sort of going from everything still being in C++ to using Java, to moving to, now a lot more TypeScript. I did a lot with Dart, these sort of modern higher level languages. I think there is, people are learning how to make better programming languages and better programming environments and developer experience and all of that. And then obviously with all of the open source, so I'm doing a lot of, AI machine learning stuff right now. So I write a lot of Python because that's sort of what people have coalesced around. But Python itself has gotten a lot better than when I was first dabbling with it, whatever it was, 10 or 15 years ago. So yeah, and this is an area where things like ChatGPT and Gemini and so forth, I think are really helpful, because as an engineer, if you're more experienced, the concepts well, you're just missing kind of the surface level, like what's the way you invoke it this way, or what's the sort of Pythonic way of writing something. And that's the kind of stuff that those kind of AI assistants are really good at showing you. They may not teach you the deep concepts if you didn't already have them, but teaching you how to quickly become kind of conversationally fluent, if you will, with a new language or a new framework, right? It's not just at the programming language level. It's also like, are you a React guy or a Vue guy, or are you a whatever, AWS, Google Cloud, whatever kind of thing. And I think getting up to speed more quickly on those has never been easier.
It's beautiful. Joseph, I think that you're an expert in AI. What are your thoughts about the future of even programmers and their jobs and AI? I tell you this because 40% of the code we're writing is already done by AI in my companies. I believe it's going to be the same for you, or if it's not already is. But what's going to happen in 5 years from now?
So I'm very bullish on AI, but I don't think it's going to replace the job of software engineer anytime soon, at least for the people who are thinking deeply about how what the technology you're building addresses not only the solution you're trying to solve today, but the way the solution is likely to evolve in the future. There's just an awful lot of context that goes into that that's not in the context window, if you will, of the way we use AI coding assistants today. And in order to have that context, like if I think about how I know what code to write, it's partly the time I spend talking to customers. It's partly the time I spend reading the news and figuring out what's changing. It's partly my own kind of mental model about the psychology of the users and the competitive landscape and knowing where we're likely to have to make a lot of iterations, and therefore we don't want to put too much scaffolding and infrastructure around it versus what stuff needs to be bulletproof, and therefore we really want to, and now maybe in theory you could explain all of that given time to an AI assistant the way, if you think about like hiring a new person, how do you get them up to speed, not just about do they know Python, but do they understand your business well enough? Do they understand your tech stack well enough? Do they understand the way your requirements are likely to evolve over time so that they're making the right kind of trade-offs that aren't going to cause the tech debt and so forth, right? But I just think that that's not a problem about the AI tech itself not being smart enough. It's a problem about how you incept that kind of 360 knowledge base into whatever the conscious agent is, to say nothing of the actual sort of motivation or autonomy that agent has. So I think for a long time, AI will be a really powerful accelerant to knowledge workers. And I think there are some classes of jobs that will probably be able to be eliminated because of that. But I think overall, I think we're a long way away, at least before we can have sort of agents that have enough wherewithal and are attending all our meetings and keeping up with the latest news and whatever, talking to colleagues, et cetera, that they kind of their own know what to do.
Yeah, what I'm experiencing is that I need less coders to do more work. It's not that I don't need coders anymore. So
and that's actually good, right? Because the Mythical Man Month is a real thing. So I think if you can have a smaller number of more productive individuals and less cooks in the kitchen, less information sharing, less room for games of telephone, all of that sort of thing, that's actually wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
So I hope that's the case. I hope it's good for, smaller teams to be able to do even more.
Yeah. And we can see that clearly now, and it's incredible. Like it's almost like, remember when they invented the code repositories online, right? And before you had to have your code server there, and it was a mess, and then everything is compiled online, and you have all this beautiful automation for doing the entire builds.
And honestly, I still think developer experience is underinvested in. I think there's a lot more that we could be doing in startup land and in big companies to make developers more productive and to make that inner loop faster and to make things more observable and all of that. So I'm always a big fan of companies like, like Vercel and others that are clearly kind of pushing the envelope on that because they realize it's just an inherently good thing. I hope that kind of continues to radiate out, because a lot of what we deal with is still, pretty frustrating, where it's just, it takes too long, or you can't really tell what happened, or it's too hard to go back and find the logs, or, and that stuff seems grungy and unimportant, but I do think it's the rate limiting factor of innovation in some ways, which is how quickly can you come up with an idea, try it out, see what works, iterate, etc. And so anything that accelerates that inner loop is going to have a massive impact overall.
Joseph, I really have to watch the time because I don't want to be abusive with your time, but I could be talking to you the whole
yeah,
week.
No, I'm good on my end. This is fun now, so yeah. I have to keep our listeners' attention span in mind too, I guess.
It's been 45 minutes already. I have so many more questions for you. I wonder if you don't mind, let's do a second episode with you. I want to talk deeper about AI. I wrote an AI book last year that became very popular. It's called AI or Die. And the book is a business book for entrepreneurs, and the fact that they have to wake up to this technology and how to utilize it in their business, otherwise they're going to go bankrupt. That's the die part. But having able to meet you and you being so involved with the Google AI devices and what you're doing now with AI with your current company, I would love to keep exploring. For example, ChatGPT just released this new version. I think it's called Sophia, where they are actually, you can prompt the AI to make a movie, and the stuff that I'm seeing
these
is like
soar education models are very cool. Yeah. Yeah.
So number one, I want to demystify that in our next episode. And I also want to give people assurance and the vision of where they need to go, because every time we have a revolution in technology, people think it's the end of the world and we're not going to have any more jobs. And I can see pinpoint from being gatherers, right, and hunters into farmers, into industrial revolution, into information age. Now we're becoming a new era in the information age that is more than that. But every time we have been able to reinvent ourselves. For example, by 1900s, 90% of males in the USA were working in farms. Now it's 5%.
That's right. That's right. No, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, the reason I got excited to go study AI at Stanford 25 years ago was, back then with that first, you think back to the Ray Kurzweil and Doug Hofstadter and Hans Moravec, and we started having these books that were like, oh, AI could really usher in a second industrial revolution for knowledge work. And I really did believe that was going to happen in our lifetimes, and how important it could be, because intelligence is the rate limiting factor on so much of what we need to solve all the problems in the world, right? And so it's amazing to see how much progress we've made since then. And I know so many brilliant people who are in the middle of OpenAI and Google and all these places, and I can tell you they don't know any better than any of us what's going to happen next. And that's both exciting and scary, but it's
that's exactly
but it's just definitely worth paying attention to. I think the hype is real, and I think there's this kind of long-term epithet thrown around in Silicon Valley about this thing as a solution in search of a problem, which kind of means like they've got some piece of tech but they don't really know what it's good for. I think the thing is, a lot of technology does start out that way, which is, we figured out that transformers could let us build these much larger models that could absorb a lot more data, that could suddenly start behaving a lot better. And that, that doesn't tell you necessarily what it's going to be good for, or what industries will it transform, or what jobs will it replace. You have to kind of go out there and see, can you actually solve a real problem in the real world using it, right? And we're seeing lots of AI-based startups now where I think it's still unclear. Is this going to be a game changer? Is this going to fundamentally change the dynamics of the industry? Is it just going to sort of help the incumbents do what they're doing a little bit more efficiently? And I think it's cool that nobody knows. Like, it just is a motivation to go out there and, like I said, fall in love with problems, try to make sure you're solving something where you can wake up each day and actually care about moving the ball forward. Or you can look around and go, gee, I don't really know what to do, but nobody else knows any better, so let's roll up our sleeves and give it a try. And at least to me, that's very empowering.
So as a teaser for our audience, our next episode, we're going to focus on singularity, because you mentioned Ray Kurzweil and his about singularity. People don't even know what that means. I want to focus on that. I want to explore Neuralink and what Elon Musk is doing, and all these wonderful things that are coming from Silicon Valley that are exciting, but they're very scary at the same time. So
and I guess to me, it's I'd rather be with an oar in the boat trying to steer it in a good direction than sort of sitting on the sidelines and saying like, oh no, this is going to be woe is me. And I think, Silicon Valley, one of the things you learn when you're there is the people all generally do want to talk to each other and share what's going on and follow feedback. And so you really do feel a sense of agency that you can be part of that mix, and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. We never expected, Twitter and Facebook and whatever to be as big as they were at the time, right? All that kind of stuff can be surprising, but you can keep pushing forward and at least feel like you're part of the solution instead of just catastrophizing on the side. So I think, we can all be doing that. And that at least makes me a little more optimistic.
Beautiful, Joseph. Thank you so much for your time. I'll see you next time for second episode. By the way, this very rarely happens, so I'm glad that you said yes, because I think we have much to talk about specifically on AI and the future of the world. It's going to be fantastic.
Sounds great. Well, I hope people are excited for the sequel.
Yes. God bless you, brother.
All right. Great to talk to you. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.